Please enjoy this story. If it resonates with you, consider sharing your thoughts below and subscribing for more heartfelt content. The Wednesday had unfolded like any other Wednesday, which is to say with that gentle predictability that had become the hallmark of my existence since Edward passed and the children scattered to their own lives. I'm Vivian, by the way, just a woman tending her small garden of memories and sunflowers in a quiet tree-lined neighborhood. The morning light was doing that lovely thing where it spills through the dining room window, creating little prisms in the steam rising from my second cup of chai. I'd been planning to tackle the cluttered bookcase in the study, a task I'd postponed for, about half a year, and had finally mustered the determination for the dusty undertaking. That's when the doorbell chimed. Unexpected visitors aren't common for me. The occasional package delivery. Sometimes Helen from next door wanting to borrow baking powder or share community happenings. So a flutter of curiosity stirred as I wiped my hands on my gardening smock and made my way to the entrance. Peering through the glass, I spotted a young man standing on my porch, a book tucked beneath his arm. It took a moment to recognize him, tall, slender, with that familiar unruly dark hair that seemed to resist any styling attempt. It was Daniel, Robert, and Emily's son from across the street. Goodness, he wasn't a boy anymore, was he? Must be mid-20s by now. I hadn't seen much of him since he'd departed for university. I opened the door, a smile already forming. "Daniel, what a pleasant surprise. Come in." He had a shy smile that creased the corners of his warm hazel eyes, Emily's eyes. "Hi, Mrs. Winters. Hope I'm not interrupting anything." "Not at all, dear. I was just preparing myself to battle a mountain of literature. What brings you by?" I stepped back, welcoming him into the hallway, the scent of old pages and lavender polish. My signature home fragrance seemed to greet him. "Mom asked me to return this," he said, extending the book. It was a well-loved copy of *Whisper of Stars*, one I frequently shared. "She finished it last week, and well, you know, Mom, she gets distracted." I chuckled. Emily was a wonderful soul, but focus wasn't always her strength. "That she does. Thank you, Daniel. Would you like to stay for a moment? I just brewed fresh tea, or perhaps some lemonade. It's warming up outside." The invitation emerged spontaneously, simply the old habit of hospitality. He hesitated briefly, just long enough for me to assume he'd decline. "Tea sounds wonderful, actually, if it's no trouble." "No trouble whatsoever," I assured him, leading the way to the kitchen. "Have a seat at the table." My kitchen has sunny cream walls, somewhat crowded with jars and recipe collections. The window above the sink overlooks my bird feeder, currently hosting a particularly animated cardinal. Daniel settled in, placing the novel carefully on the gingham tablecloth. He looked slightly out of place in my cozy, somewhat old-fashioned kitchen in his simple navy shirt and jeans. Yet there was an ease about him, too. "So how have you been, Daniel?" I asked, pouring him a mug of tea, the aromatic fragrance filling the air. "Last I heard you were working, was it downtown, some sort of computer position?" He accepted the mug gratefully. "Yes, digital architecture. It's engaging, keeps me occupied." He sipped his tea. "This is excellent tea, Mrs. Winters. Call me Vivian, please. Mrs. Winters makes me feel ancient," I said with a light laugh. "And the secret to the tea is a cardamom pod in the leaves." A genuine smile spread across his face, transforming his somewhat reserved expression. "Vivian, then. Cardamom. I'll have to remember that." He glanced around the kitchen, his gaze lingering on the photographs pinned to the bulletin board near the telephone pictures of my children at various ages. Edward and me on a long ago mountain vacation. "It's lovely in here, welcoming, reminds me of my grandmother's house. That simple comment tugged at something in my chest. My own grandmother's kitchen had always been a sanctuary of warmth and comforting aromas. Thank you, Daniel. That's quite a lovely compliment. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the only sounds the ticking of the antique clock in the hallway and the distant humming of a garden trimmer. I noticed his hands then, cradling the teacup long, fingered, capable, looking hands, not the soft hands of a child any more. There were faint pen marks on his right thumb, as though he'd been writing. So, did you enjoy the book? I asked, nodding toward Whisper of Stars *. It seemed a safe, neutral topic. His expression softened. I actually reread sections when Mom finished. It's been years, it's powerful, still resonates. It truly does, I agreed. Marcus Green was always a hero of mine. Mine too, he said, his voice quieter. It makes you reflect on things, about doing what's right even when it's difficult. He looked directly at me then, his hazel eyes surprisingly intense. There aren't many Marcus Greens in the world anymore, are there? His question, so direct and somewhat melancholic, caught me unprepared. It wasn't the sort of inquiry expected from your neighbor's son who simply dropped by to return borrowed literature. It was the kind of question that typically emerged after several glasses of wine with old friends, or during those quiet, searching hours of night. And that, I suppose, was the first subtle tremor, the first indication that this wouldn't be merely polite, superficial conversation. The air in my sunny kitchen suddenly felt slightly heavier, charged with an unspoken something, and I found myself leaning forward, genuinely wanting to hear what he might say next. What followed truly surprised me. He didn't wait for a response, not really. It was more a thought spoken aloud. He traced the rim of his teacup with a fingertip. He continued, a slight furrow in his brow. Everyone's so quick to judge, so vocal with their opinions, but how many are willing to actually stand for something, to listen? It feels like a forgotten art. I found myself nodding slowly. I understand what you mean, Daniel. The world feels more chaotic somehow than it used to, and not always constructively. I thought of the constant stream of news, the endless debates on social platforms that even I, a reluctant participant, couldn't completely avoid. Exactly, he said, looking relieved that I comprehended. I work in technology, you know, and it's all about connection, supposedly linking people globally. But sometimes I think we've just discovered more ways to misunderstand each other, faster and more loudly than ever before. He gave a short, somewhat rueful laugh. Sorry, I didn't intend to become philosophical with you. No, please don't apologize. I said and meant it. It was refreshing, truly. How often did I have conversations like this anymore? My friends and I usually discussed our gardens, our grandchildren, the latest remedies for joint pain, important matters. Yes, life matters, but not often this kind of exploration. It's a valid thought, and somewhat unexpected from someone your age, if you don't mind my saying. I tend to associate that kind of world weariness with us older individuals. He smiled a genuine, almost boyish grin this time. Perhaps I'm just an old soul. Or maybe it's the literature Mom always said I had my nose in a book from when I learned to read. Yours included. He added, gesturing to the copy of *Whisper*. This one, *The Silver Bay*, *Ember Rising*, they make you think. They certainly do. I murmured, my mind drifting to my own dusty shelves in the study, a silent testament to a lifetime of seeking understanding through stories. It's interesting you mention *Ember Rising*, I said. I was considering revisiting that. It feels more relevant than ever these days, doesn't it? The concept of knowledge being dangerous, of people willingly surrendering the right to think independently. Daniel's eyes brightened. It absolutely does. The way Holloway speaks about why books needed burning. It's chilling because you can see elements of it happening. People choosing simple entertainment over anything challenging. He leaned forward slightly. The earlier shyness completely vanished, replaced by animated passion. I actually tried discussing it with colleagues, and they just stared at me oddly. They were more interested in the latest action film or viral video. I felt a pang of something akin to recognition. Not because I regularly discussed dystopian novels with my contemporaries, but because I recognized that feeling of holding a thought or passion that didn't quite align with those around you. It can be difficult finding people who want to delve deeper. I acknowledged. Yes, he said, then glanced down at his mug, a flicker of that earlier reserve returning. So, thank you for letting me ramble, Daniel. I said gently, that wasn't rambling, it was a conversation, and a very interesting one. I refreshed his tea and my own. The afternoon sun had shifted now, casting longer shadows across the kitchen floor. The cardinal had flown away, replaced by a pair of chattering finches. Tell me, what else have you been reading or contemplating? It was a simple invitation, but it felt like opening a door I hadn't realized was closed. He hesitated only briefly before a small smile touched his lips. Well, since you asked. And just like that, the conversation flowed again, more easily this time. We discussed books, yes, but it wasn't merely about plots and characters. It was about the ideas they sparked, the emotions they evoked, the questions they left lingering. He spoke with an earnestness, a surprising depth of thought that I found myself drawn to. He talked about the pressures of his fast-paced career, the feeling of being a minor component in an enormous mechanism, and his quiet desire to do something more meaningful, though he wasn't entirely certain what that might be. I listened, truly listened, perhaps in a way I hadn't listened to anyone in quite some time. There was no agenda, no need to offer solutions or advice, just the simple act of hearing another person's thoughts, their quiet hopes and uncertainties. And in his words, I found echoes of my younger self. That period of searching and questioning that seems to fade with the routines and responsibilities of middle age. He asked me questions, too, about Edward, about my children, about what growing up in a different era was like. He wasn't merely being polite. There was genuine curiosity in his voice, a desire to understand. I found myself sharing things I hadn't spoken of in years, memories that lay dormant, buried in the dust of everyday existence. I talked about my early dreams of becoming a writer, a passion I'd set aside when motherhood called. I even confessed my secret love for classic black and white films, the kind with clever dialogue and elegant stars. You wanted to be a writer, he asked, his expression thoughtful. Why didn't you pursue it later, after your children were grown? The question was direct but not unkind. I paused, looking out the window at the peacefully feeding finches. Life, I suppose, I said with a sigh. It has a way of setting you on a path, and sometimes you forget there were other trails you once wanted to explore, and then it just feels too late. I don't believe it's ever too late to explore a trail, Vivian, Daniel said softly, his gaze steady on mine. Maybe, just in a different way. His words, so simple, so earnest, landed with surprising weight. It wasn't a platitude, it felt like a genuine belief he was offering me. And in that moment, looking at this young man, my neighbor's son, who I'd only ever known as a child from across the street, I felt a connection that was as unexpected as it was profound. The realization wasn't a sudden occurrence, no crashing cymbals or dramatic revelation. It was a quieter thing, a dawning awareness. The realization was understanding how much common ground could exist in the most unlikely places, with the most unexpected people. It was the surprise of being truly seen, and of seeing someone else, perhaps for the first time. The afternoon was waning, the light outside turning golden, and I knew this conversation was something special, something I wouldn't soon forget. The antique clock in the hall chimed, a soft, sonorous sound that seemed to mark a shift in the afternoon's gentle rhythm. Daniel glanced toward the sound, a flicker of awareness in his eyes, as if remembering that time outside this kitchen was still progressing. "Goodness already," he said, a note of surprise in his voice. "I should probably let you return to your day. I've occupied so much of your time." "Not at all, Daniel," I said, and it was the truest thing I'd expressed all day. "This has been, well, it's been a real pleasure. I mean that." The mountain of books in the study was completely forgotten, replaced by a feeling of lightness, of unexpected camaraderie. He stood, and I did too. For a moment we just stood there by the table, the remnants of our tea and conversation hanging in the warm air between us. There was a comfortable silence, not awkward, but one that acknowledged something meaningful had passed between us. "Thank you again for the tea, Vivian," he said, his earlier shyness replaced by warm sincerity, "and for the conversation. It's not every day you get to discuss Marcus Green and dystopian futures with someone who truly understands." I smiled. "The pleasure was mine, Daniel. It's good to know there are still people reading the worthwhile books and thinking the important thoughts." He picked up *Whisper of Stars* from the table, holding it momentarily. "You know," he said, looking at the worn cover, "I have several books at my parents' place. Some I think you might enjoy. Classic science fiction mostly, but the kind that really makes you reflect, like you mentioned. Perhaps I could bring them over sometime if you'd like. That is, if you're interested." The offer was casual, yet it felt like more than just a polite gesture. It was an opening, a possibility of future conversations, and I found myself, to my own surprise, genuinely hoping he would. "I'd like that very much, Daniel," I said. "I'm always searching for new old books, if that makes any sense." He grinned. "Makes perfect sense to me." He headed toward the hallway, and I walked with him. At the front door, he paused, turning to face me. The afternoon light from the side windows illuminated his face, highlighting the earnestness in his hazel eyes. "Seriously, Vivian," he said, his voice slightly lower, more earnest. "Thank you. I've been feeling somewhat untethered lately. My job is fine, pays the bills, but sometimes I wonder what the purpose of it all is. You know, talking with you today, it helped. It made me feel a bit more grounded." His admission, so open and vulnerable, touched me deeply. Here was this young man on the cusp of his life, grappling with the same existential questions that people of all ages face, and he was sharing that with me. A woman practically a stranger to him an hour before. It was a gift, that kind of trust, Daniel. I said, my voice equally soft. "We all feel untethered sometimes, no matter our age. The important thing is to keep seeking those moments of connection, those conversations that make us feel grounded. They're out there, sometimes in the most unexpected places." I smiled, thinking of how this ordinary Wednesday had become anything but. He met my gaze, a look of profound understanding passing between us. It wasn't a romantic connection, not in any conventional sense. It was something else, something perhaps rarer, and in its own way more precious. It was a meeting of minds, a recognition of shared humanity, a moment of genuine empathy that transcended age and circumstance. This was the real discovery, the beautiful, quiet surprise of it all. The world suddenly felt a little less chaotic, a little more hopeful. "I'll see you around, Vivian," he said, opening the door. "You too, Daniel, and tell your mother." I said, "Hello." He nodded, gave a small wave, and then he was gone, walking down the porch steps and across the street. I watched him for a moment, a tall, thoughtful figure disappearing into the familiar landscape of our neighborhood, a landscape that somehow looked a little different now, imbued with a new layer of meaning. I closed the door slowly, leaning against it for a moment. The kitchen was quiet again, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sounds of the neighborhood. The scent of tea still lingered, but now it was mingled with the fainter, more intangible aroma of shared thoughts and unexpected kinship. I walked back into the kitchen, my gaze falling on the 2 empty teacups still on the table. Such ordinary objects, yet they felt like artifacts from a significant encounter. I hadn't tackled the cluttered bookcase in the study. I hadn't completed any of the chores I'd planned. Instead, I had stumbled into something far more enriching. I had connected with another human being on a level I hadn't anticipated, and it had stirred something within me, something that had been dormant for too long. It was a feeling of aliveness, of curiosity, of a renewed sense of wonder about the world and the people in it. My neighbor's son had come by to return a book, and in doing so, he had returned a piece of myself to me. I walked over to the window above the sink, looking out at my small garden. The sunflowers were blazing golden in the late afternoon sun. Edward had always loved sunflowers. He'd said they were like little suns, even on cloudy days. For a long time after he passed, looking at them had brought a pang of sadness. But today they just looked bright, cheerful, full of life. Daniel's words about it never being too late to explore a trail, even in a different way, echoed in my mind. My old dream of being a writer, it wasn't about bestsellers or literary acclaim anymore. Maybe it was about something simpler. Maybe it was about capturing stories, even small ones. Maybe it was about paying attention, truly paying attention to the world around me, to the quiet dramas and unexpected connections that unfolded every day, even in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. I thought about our conversation, the ease with which we'd moved from polite chit-chat to deeper reflections. There had been no pretense, no awkwardness, just a natural unfolding. It was a reminder that genuine connection doesn't require grand gestures or dramatic events. Sometimes it's as simple as 2 people sharing a cup of tea and a willingness to listen, truly listen. The initial observation I'd made wasn't about scandal or drama, but the profound realization of how easily we can misjudge or overlook the people around us, even those we see every day. Daniel wasn't just Robert and Emily's boy anymore. He was a thoughtful, searching individual with a rich inner life, someone capable of deep conversation and surprising insights. And perhaps in his eyes, I wasn't just Mrs. Winters, the quiet widow from across the street. Perhaps he saw something more too. That evening, instead of turning on the television out of habit, I found myself pulling out an old empty journal and a pen. The ink flowed surprisingly easily. I didn't write about grand philosophies or try to solve the world's problems. I just wrote about the afternoon, about the sunlight in the kitchen, the smell of tea and cardamom, the earnest look in a young man's eyes as he talked about books and dreams, and the search for meaning. I described the way the conversation had meandered like a gentle stream, touching on unexpected shores. It felt good to write, to put those thoughts and feelings into words. It was like exploring one of those forgotten trails Daniel had mentioned, not a path back to an old dream, perhaps, but a new path, one that felt uniquely my own. I realized that the personal discovery wasn't just about seeing Daniel differently. It was about seeing myself differently too. I wasn't just a collection of past roles: wife, mother, widow. I was still Vivian, a person capable of new connections, new thoughts, new growth. The encounter had been brief, just a couple of hours on an ordinary Wednesday, but its ripples were continuing to spread. It had nudged me out of a comfortable, perhaps too quiet routine. It had reminded me of the joy of intellectual companionship, the spark that comes from a meeting of minds, and it had done so with such mutual respect, such a gentle unfolding of shared vulnerability. A few days later, I saw Emily, Daniel's mother, at the garden center. "Vivian," she'd exclaimed, "Daniel told me he had such a lovely chat with you the other day. He really enjoyed your tea and your company. He even said you discussed some of those thoughtful books he enjoys." She beamed. "It's so wonderful to see him connecting with people. He can be somewhat reserved, you know." I smiled. "He's a remarkable young man, Emily. You and Robert did a wonderful job." And I meant it. He was a testament to the fact that thoughtfulness and depth weren't lost qualities. The world might be chaotic, as I'd said to him, but there were still quiet places, quiet conversations where real understanding could be found. My little kitchen had been one of them that Wednesday afternoon. I didn't know if Daniel would bring over those science fiction books he'd mentioned. It didn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. What mattered was the experience itself, the unexpected gift of that afternoon. It had been a reminder that life, even in its quieter chapters, could still hold surprises, still offer moments of profound connection and personal growth. It had awakened me, yes, but in the best possible way. It had roused me a little, reminded me to keep my own doors and my mind open, and for that I was incredibly grateful. The book he returned was about justice and empathy, and in a small, personal way, our conversation had been about that too, about seeing each other clearly and connecting with respect and an open heart, and that, I thought, was a story worth remembering.